Query store question. Is there a way to filter out system queries in the graphs? And so let me show folks what this question is about. In these built-in reports for Query Store that we have back under the database bucket, when you're using Query Store in the real world, if I'm looking at top resource consuming queries here, whichever way I want to look at this, the question is there a way, and now I've clicked on the graph there, I can sort things by, different things. So if I just sorted by logical reads, which way did I sort by logical reads? Let's go back. So highest logical reads query is here. And the question is there a way to filter this? Not that I know of at this point. This button kind of looks like a filter, but this is just view the query text. We have track, we have refresh. And it isn't just system queries that I know some folks who, when you're working with this, you might just have some top queries in here who you're like, yep, we have a giant tooltip here. Thank you, Management Studio. You might have a query, you just are like, yeah, we've tuned that. We don't want to see that in the list anymore. These are known issues. We'd rather see other stuff. I believe there is a user voice request for this. I'll look for what the idea is, because it would be, I think, nice to have some different filtering options for this screen and to be able to see more things for this report. If I go into the configure menu, I do not think that they're there yet. So let's see if I can get to my configure. Okay, I've gotten to configure up here on different resolutions. It is tricky. And now I'm in this. There is OK buttons at the bottom. At my 1080p resolution, I can't get to those buttons, but there aren't any filter options on this that I know of. I can change what I graph by, which is great. But yeah, at this point, I don't think there are ways to filter that. You can, of course, write lots of queries for looking at the extended events tables and views and do your own filtering in your own T-SQL, or find maybe a third-party tool that will read from the Query Store database for you, since they do expose all of that from the Query Store views, but that's kind of our only option at this point. I feel your pain there. Can you get an extended event to raise an alert for a requested event? Tell me more about what a requested event is. I'm not entirely sure what you mean by a requested event in that case. I have thought about your question, and now I think I know more about what you mean. Can I get it to notify me? You mean raise an alert in the sense of firing an alert, like for an event that we are tracing, I think. So just please confirm if I'm right there. Okay, yes, thank you. It took a minute for the words to sink in. So in other words, I have events going to this event file, but I had to go open up this event file and look for it. One of the things that can be confusing to some folks is that we have two things that sound really similar. We have extended events and we have event notifications, and we have two words, right? We have some overlap in the naming of those. Event notifications are a way of getting notified about things. Extended events are a way of tracing things. I've seen some things recently, and I actually saw a tweet this morning from Klaus Aschenbrenner saying that now there is the ability for extended events in the target. Let's go ahead and open here. I believe this is a new feature, and I'm not sure if I actually have this in my version of SQL Server. So let's go down to my trace, and I'm going to stop the trace just in terms of if I do want to make a change to it. So it'll be there. Under my data storage, that's where I get my target. So Klaus mentioned, there it is. It is in my version. We now have the ability to have a service broker target. This may not seem exciting to you. This may seem like, I've never used service broker and I'm a little wary of this, and can things go real haywire? Yeah, I get it. Not a lot of folks use service broker. In fact, I have an upcoming podcast episode about why I don't teach service broker. But service broker, I have not played with this, obviously. I'm like, do I have it in my version? One of the things about Service Broker is that Service Broker actually works behind the scene on event notifications. If you set up event notifications in SQL Server, it is a way of you can push things into a queue and say, hey, I want to get alerted about these things. I am wondering if perhaps this Service Broker target could be used to say, when this event fires, push it into this queue. And if you can hook that up so that an event notification is fired that then you can use to notify you. So early stages, just started thinking about this. That strikes me as one of the ways to get notified by this. I'll try to think if I can think of another way, because tracing is not the same as you're like, how do I connect this with my alerts? Depending on what event you're tracing, sometimes you can set up a simple alert that's based on a performance counter, not the trace. That's often my kind of way of rigging up an alert, is setting up in the SQL agent an alert that looks at a related perf counter. The perf counter won't give me as much detail as the trace, but they can work together. But for one like this one, I do kind of wonder if that service broker might bridge it. So I'll try to look into that over the next few weeks. It would make an interesting blog post. And in fact, I tweeted back to Klaus today, like, hey, this was my first thought, is that it might work for those together. I suspect he may have some ideas on that. So it would be interesting to see if there's already a solution brewing out there. Could be very cool. So yeah, with alerts, I tend to look for performance counters first because they're so lightweight, but I am wondering if there's a way to hook this up to event notifications. Could be interesting. But yeah, okay, so I do have it all ready for testing in here for myself too. All right, cool. Those are great questions. Love it. Love it. And although I'm not a huge fan of Service Broker, and I will explain more about that in the podcast, I actually have used event notifications successfully in the past to set up alerting for a variety of things, and been pretty happy with it. So yeah, you just got to be willing to have that Service Broker behind the scenes. Little Service Broker baggage there. All right. So question, do you have time to show this event in a histogram? I do. And I don't think this event, I love the histogram target. It is, in terms of how much detail it gives you, sometimes it's better or worse for an event, but I think it'll be fun to do for this one. So let's see. In terms of when, do I still have that window open? I think I closed that window. Let's set up the properties for this. And I'm just going to switch over the target to a histogram target. So I am going to remove my current target. And even after I remove my target, this is my folder where I'm storing this, I still have my file here for that event. It doesn't delete my file. I am left to manage that, which I think is good. And now I'm going to choose a histogram target, which likes to aggregate data. If I want to know how often something is happening somewhere, the histogram target can bucketize this for me. It asks me, what do you want to base your buckets on? So some examples of what I like the histogram target for that I've just done, within recent history. And this is not a common thing hopefully you don't have to commonly use plan guides, but one frustration with using plan guides in SQL Server is you're like, well, is this plan guide being used? Maybe you didn't create the plan guide, maybe somebody else did. And you're like, maybe you have 4 plan guides and you're like, are any of these being used? There's a perf counter that'll kind of give you aggregate uses, but then you're like, well, which one? You can create a trace for plan guide use. You could bucketize by the plan guide ID or name. I think you can bucketize by the name, and then it'll just count how often it sees them used. Similar to the other trace, it counts when the plan guide's used to compile a query, but at least you can get some usage out of there. If I'm doing testing, definitely outside of production on like counting locks by different locks type, a histogram target could be great for that as well. So I have to pick first what event to filter on. I only have one event here, so that is very easy. Then I have to pick, okay, what do you want to group by? We're going to group by one thing and then count. What are my options? I can group by an action. These are those 2 global fields I added. So I could count how many times different session IDs counted, and I can pick how many things can be grouped, or I can count how many different query texts are seen, or I can go into the field and say group by plan ID and query ID. So let's group by plan ID, or actually let's group by query ID. I think it makes more sense for this, or we could group by the error number, might be interesting as well. It's not going to give me the detailed message though. I am just counting with this. So I'm not going to see that message text if I group by query ID. I suppose I could, let's group by message. That'll be fun. let's group by message. But notice it's going to give me just a failure message and then a count. It's not going to give me in this target any of the other fields. So let's say okay, and we'll start this up. And now it's going to log something every single time it runs because of the recompile hint. That's handy. So let's just run this one. A little refresh delay here. That happens with this virtual machine. All right, so I've now run that a few times. And now if I double click on my package event file, this error is very familiar to me because what happened was I changed this data file target and I didn't refresh my extended events. So the data, like the metadata in Object Explorer is referring to the old target, and I now have a histogram target. And this message is actually appropriate because it says refresh the sessions folder because I'm a little confused here. I don't see that target. So this error actually made sense. So now it says my package name is a histogram, and I can open my histogram up and I can see that here is the message. And this actually could be a useful thing because my message has a lot of detail in it. I am having to, let's see if we can copy here. It's a little tricky to read the message in this view, but if I paste it into Notepad, actually I do like grouping by this because in the message itself, I get the I don't get the information. I think this 7, that's the count. In the message itself, it's not telling me the forced plan ID, right? So it's a little awkward to group by this column, but you get the gist. We get the column we're grouping by, and then we get the value of the count of what it is counting by that bucket. You can also query these with T-SQL. One thing about the histogram target, if I stop my session and then try to open my target there, it is not running. I must start the session. My target data has actually been cleared out by stopping the session, and it will renew again. This is not persisted to a file. This is not an event file target. It is not in this folder or anywhere else. It is in memory in the SQL server. So I do, if I'm interested in things in the histogram target and then my SQL server restarts, that's also going to restart your trace and the data from your target will be cleared. You could, of course, periodically collect it with a job running T-SQL as well. I do love, yeah, thanks. That looks very useful. I agree. And it is nice and lightweight for situations where you want to group by something and count. It can be fantastic. Sometimes there's a little extra work involved. So I was testing something and I was looking at latches, which is one of those debug events, and it can generate a lot of data. And by using the histogram target, I no longer had to slog through like 40,000 lines of trace and try to group the trace data, which can be slow. But it would only show me the latch types by number. And I'm like, oh, great. Well, what is this latch? So I had to figure out, by running other things where I could get the latch name, I had to then match. So sometimes there's a little legwork involved, but I do think the histogram target can be very, very useful. And the histogram target, I think, is a huge benefit to extended events. I actually don't have a vendetta against old school SQL trace, server-side SQL trace. Very good friend to me for many years, but there are just more things we can do with extended events. Things like the histogram target and things like some of the configuration settings for it. One of the things I miss is that there's no, if we look at the properties, there's no configuration item for when should I automatically stop this trace. And with ye old SQL trace, I'm kind of operating off memory here. I believe that if you script out SQL trace, you can be like, oh, stop at X time. And that was just convenient. Of course, you could set up an agent job that at X time stops the trace because we can, let's actually run the rest of the demo. If I go into our solution file, we can programmatically stop and close the trace. So there's a workaround. It's not bad, but I do kind of miss that. Okay, I only want you to run for this amount of time and then stop. So here's the T-SQL for stopping our trace, and then we can also drop it at any time. All right, folks, thanks so much for coming. I am going to work on getting this video processed. I love the extra demo. I think that added a lot of extra value to the SQL challenge, and I love the questions. So I will see you guys soon. We have a couple SQL challenges coming up. The next ones are on combining indexes. And then let me consult my whiteboard. I'm thinking of, I'm going to add more to the schedule. There's one I want to do on, okay, this insert is slow, troubleshoot it and make the insert fast. And then there's another one on logging schema changes. So how can we, using built-in tools in SQL Server, rig something up so that if user X, who, imagine we have an environment where schema changes can be made by users with permissions, but we have had a case where like, oh, how did that index get dropped? Maybe someone accidentally ran the script against production. We will set up a logging system so that when schema changes are made, it gets logged to a table. So I will be putting those out for sign up as well soon. All right, folks, I think it's Thursday. So have a great weekend. Happy Friday, one day early, and I'll see y'all soon. Thanks, folks.